right, guys. So my spiel is kind of done. Just for those who just came in, this is not one of our normal regeneration iteration meetings. This is Antony Upward Part 2, where today we get introduced into the role of human organizations and realizing system change and a new paradigm on how we communicate and theorize change for others. This is an awesome session, guys. I'm really excited about this one. This is where we tie it back into how can we communicate better? How can we help others with that first steps, especially when they're blocked and they're pushed back on us and they need a little bit of help to get there. I'm excited for this session and I'm just here to support Antony. So this is not one of our normal interviews. And again, like always, if you see me pacing in chat, the link for the sheet is just so I make sure the last person in the room has access to that. So that said, Antony, the floor is yours. I'm not going to introduce you again because everyone hopefully knows who you are. If not, they can open up the sheet and learn all about you. Guys, there's 4 tabs in the sheet. Make sure we're on part 2. That's what we're following today. Go ahead, Antony. Floor is yours, sir. Thank you so much for being here.
Myself, thank you very much, Sage, for that very warm introduction. And hello, everybody. It's nice to see some faces who were there for part one. It's nice to see some faces that I haven't seen in some time, and it's nice to see some very familiar faces as well. So, welcome, everybody. I'm really happy and honored that I've been invited to chat with the Global Regeneration Collab community today. As you may recall, in part one of the conversation, we were talking about language. This time we're going to be talking about organizations and how those organizations might apply that new language and really focus on what we're all here to do, which is to change the system and how do human organizations play a role in that. I start all my talks with an acknowledgement of, first of all, our social privilege in the community that I help convene, which is a worldwide community. I do this respectful of the fact that people are from all over the world and not just from a Canadian or North American context. So I'd like to just observe that each of us are privileged to be on sacred land that has supported human beings for thousands of years and is rich in history, knowledge, and tradition, and that we're privileged to be the beneficiaries and the stewards of all that has come before on behalf of all the generations to come. And I'd like to invite you to consider in your place how you honor and respect peoples indigenous to your place, including for many of you in various parts of the world yourselves, who will be indigenous to your place. The other thing that I like to do is to acknowledge our ecological privilege. This is perhaps a little different from some things that other people do. And so I'd like to ask you in the chat, do you know where you are? Which bioregion are you in? Which watershed or drainage basin are you in? And if you, by the way, have a social privilege acknowledgement that you'd like to share, then please also do that in the chat. And I will do the same as well, if I can get that to work. Answers in the chat, please. Which bioregion are you in, or which watershed or drainage basin are you in? And I would be curious to see if folks know. Okay, some folks know, some folks don't. All right. For myself, here's my information. And if you'd like to learn, there's a wonderful website called oneearth.org, and that will help you identify which bioregion you're in. And then you can zoom in further and investigate the watersheds that are within that bioregion. Bioregion, very important concept to think about since they usually don't follow political boundaries, and yet that is in fact how nature is organized. And since we're dependent on nature, perhaps we ought to pay attention to that structure. So the reason for the ecological privilege acknowledgement is exactly that, that each of us and all life in each part of the world is ultimately dependent on the health of your bioregion and watershed. And so, for example, very simple example, the delivery of this event is interdependent in important ways with this place. So just think about where the sewer in your building ultimately connects to. It will connect to the watershed, hopefully through a sewer treatment plant, but in many places of the world, including surprisingly in many places in the global minority world, that is not in fact the case. And in terms of the Flourishing Business Canvas, which we're going to talk about today, bioregions and watersheds are a collection of vital biophysical stocks and solar-powered ecosystem services. And so the Flourishing Business Canvas gives us a chance to think about the connections of the business and the human organizations with our bioregion. So what are our objectives for today? It's to build on the conversation we started in part one. And so the part one conversation, for those of you who weren't there, was titled The Communication Conundrum, Why Regeneration Isn't Landing and What Can We Do About It? And we had a very interesting conversation about what the challenges are with regeneration, what alternatives we might think about, and related topics to that. So today, what I wanted to do was to share the Flourishing Enterprise Collab, that's the organization, the not-for-profit that I co-founded, what our view is on the ultimate goal of systems change, and within that, what the role of organizations are in realizing that system change. And I want to do that to provoke your interest and curiosity, hopefully, in the Global Regenerative Collab community about the product that the Flourishing Enterprise Collab has, which is called the Flourishing Enterprise Innovation Toolkit. This is a free product, free for you to use, licensed under Creative Commons, so you can use it commercially or non-commercially. So we're not selling anything today, except perhaps something that might be useful for you. And the last objective today is to really open door to possibilities for collaborations between our communities, for research, for education, and yeah, hopefully that possibility, that the door to that possibility will be opened. Agenda, I'm going to spend just a few minutes on why flourishing. We did talk about this at the last session, but for those of you who weren't there, do a quick recap. Then I want to talk about the role of organizations in system change. Then we're going to stop and have a Q&A for a few minutes. And then I'm going to spend a few minutes introducing the Flourishing Business Canvas, which is a tool to help design organizations that are focused on system change. And then we're going to do another Q&A. And then the Canvas is a great tool, but it really needs methods to help its effective use. So we're going to talk about that for 20 minutes. And then we'll do a third Q&A. And then I'll conclude with a few invitations, specific invitations to things that are happening in the flourishing business community that you might be interested in, and just a few words of conclusion. So somewhat interactive, hopefully that will stimulate some interesting conversation. And what I need to do is I need to make sure I can see all of your video, which at the moment I cannot. Where have you all gone? There we go. That's better. Okay. So why do we say sustainable flourishing should be humanity's goal or purpose, or why? The thing that we discussed at the last session was whatever it is we choose we want to sustain, it has to pass some tests as we decide what we want to sustain. It has to be realistic and practical. It has to be driven by our values and embed the best ethical and human rights frameworks. It's got to be really attractive. It's got to pass the marketing test. And it's got to be informed by science and humanity's deep indigenous wisdoms. So this was the sort of criteria that we've been using in our work to help us understand why flourishing might be a good idea. And our view is that if we attempt to sustain anything less than something that meets these criteria, it's not going to gain traction. And we believe this is a key reason why sustainability and sustainable development as terms are failing as goals for humanity with both businesses and society at large, because they don't pass these four tests. So as we discussed last time, a little thought experiment: what if we tried to sustain the possibility for flourishing? Could sustainable flourishing be good for everyone and everything, including businesses, including human organizations? And so I invite you to just play along. If you're not convinced, then just sort of play along and see what you can learn from this exploration. And if you are convinced, then welcome, and we'll talk about how we can help you move your organizations that you care about and are involved with forward towards this possibility. Want to just say that I really like what John Cage had to say about new ideas. So he said, "I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones." And I really think that that's very apropos given the current situation that we find ourselves in as the polycrisis continues to unfold, driven by the old ideas. And of course, that links nicely to what Einstein and others said about we need a new level of thinking in order to solve the problems that we created with the old level of thinking. And I'm paraphrasing roughly from his 1948, I think it was, New York Times interview, if I'm remembering correctly. So, why do we say flourishing and not sustainability? So, this is an idea that comes from positive psychology, amongst four or five other places, including Aristotle. But the idea here is that um, if we focus on doing what we're currently doing, then things are going to get pretty bad. And indeed, they are getting pretty bad, and that's only going to get worse. And sustainable development is really about sustaining the status quo. I mean, the word sustainability, that's what it means. And so it's not really looking at how good could we be. And this is where positive psychology talks about flourishing being the best that a human can strive for. And that's what we think we should be trying to do with our societies and organizations. So what we want is a thriving, regenerative, distributed economy and society within a flourishing environment. And if we move in that direction, then these are some of the types of things that will start to be normal in the world in which we live. Now, to our understanding of what's required for sustainable flourishing at the very big picture level, just to give you a sense of the shift in thinking that we're going to need and the shift in behavior. The first thing is we obviously need an environment where we have clean air and water, because otherwise we won't survive. We will need vibrant soil for food. It's very, very unlikely that we will be able to replace our food with technology anytime soon. And we need healthy ecosystems creating the materials that we need, and also rendering our biological wastes harmless. Otherwise, we poison ourselves. So this is what we need at the environment scale, and this is, of course, what the natural sciences have to say about how we might go about doing all of those things. The next thing we need is we need trusting relationships focused on well-being with all of our fellow citizens at all scales. And this is, of course, what the social sciences are focused on. The next thing we need is we need individuals to choose to strive to flourish in every possible dimension of human experience. So a few that we might be thinking about where we need to flourish include emotional, spiritual, physical, practical, artistically, economically, physiologically, etc. And the last thing we need is we need businesses, human organizations, to choose to cooperate, collaborate, and indeed compete on occasion to best meet our needs today and in the future while creating the wealth we need to meet shared needs. Yes, slides will be shared afterwards, Gil. Thank you for that reminder. So it's worth noting that there is discussion about something called the UN Flourishing Goals. So these would be what might replace the UN SDGs in 2030. For those of you who know, the SDGs were originally branded as Agenda 2030, the thing we were trying to achieve by 2030. And we've known for quite some time that people in the UN have been quite well aware of the critiques of the SDGs and we're starting to think about, well, what should replace them? The UNESCO started a conversation about what they were calling Agenda 2050, or sometimes they call it Agenda 2080. And some examples of work that's completed and underway to advise UN policymakers on which we might refer to as the worldwide movement for flourishing, include the Harvard Human Flourishing Program, which has been in existence since 2016. It's very much focused on flourishing at the individual scale, the nanoscale, as we might say. And last year they produced a huge report, tens of thousands of people around the world involved in what are the antecedents of flourishing at a personal level and how do those vary by culture. And then we've got folks from that project who wrote a book called The Global Flourishing, who wrote an article about the Global Flourishing Goals in a book called Leadership for Flourishing, which was published last year. And there's a blog post about that as well, which is kind of interesting. Then we had Zwitter and others who published an article about an integrated systems approach to development post 2030 and Earth systems governance last year. We've got the Emerald Publishing Group, who are part of the academic publishing world, who have got an initiative called Human Flourishing in a Fairer Society. And then we have two books coming out this year and then next year by Eri Mountbatten, Alina Antonescu Antonescu, whose name I badly mispronounced, Stephen Duffy, and Zayed Diamond, which are specifically trying to curate across all disciplines the best knowledge around how do we enable flourishing to advise the United Nations. And volume 2 of that series will be out next year, and Ondine and I have along with Maya Hofskog, have a chapter in that volume. So that's flourishing. The vital role of so moving on to part 2, the vital role of human organizations in systems change. So obviously, this is the system we seek to change. This is the donut economics model. And of course, the inconvenient truth here is that we're not living within the donut at all, and the trends are generally in the wrong direction. Now, this diagram is actually from around 2017, and since then, the work on the planetary boundaries, so the outer ring, the ecological ceiling, has continued. And last year, that work identified that now we are, in fact, exceeding 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So the number of red areas on the outside has gone up, not down. This is obviously not a good situation. But this is a rough description of the system that we want to change towards well-being for all, towards flourishing. And in our work, what we've discovered is a really useful model for thinking about systems called Panarchy. That was originally developed by C.S. Holling in about 2001. And what Panarchy says is that all systems, human and non-human, have a certain pattern of behavior over time. And they call this pattern of behavior the adaptive cycle. And we can see an example of the adaptive cycle here in the center. So all systems go through a period of growth, through a period of conservation, through a period of release, and then reorganization. And as it goes through this Mobius loop, resilience, connectedness, and potential all change in interesting ways. I'm not going to go into the adaptive cycle in any depth today, but the observation that Holling made is that this adaptive cycle is going on simultaneously at different scales. So we've got an adaptive cycle going on at the very largest scale. So we might call this the macro scale, as in macroeconomics. So this would be the whole biosphere, our civil society, the economy. Things tend to be very big physically, and they tend to be relatively slow to change. And then in the middle scale, the small scale, we might call this the nanoscale. This is our lived experience. This is us as individuals, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, practically, artistically, economically. And as we know, we as individuals can change very fast. We can change on a dime, and we're relatively small compared to the entire critical zone, the entire biosphere. And then in the middle, we have micro, as in microeconomics. So this is all of our organizations. And of course, this is the predominant way today we collaborate to meet most of our needs, both formal and informal. This can be not-for-profits, for-profits, and all of our institutions. What Panarchy observes is that these are 3 adaptive cycles at these 3 different scales are connected by feed-forward and feedback loops between them. So as something happens slowly at the large scale, it can shift things at the smaller scales. And similarly, when things happen at the smaller scales, they can push the larger scales to change. And what we observe is that we've had huge efforts to transform the outcomes of our activities in the world, our society and economy, from within the macro and nano scales, but we've had much less work at the micro scale. And not to disparage work that has been done, and Gil, you're a prime example of somebody who's been working at the micro scale for a very, very long time. But compared to things like the UN SDGs, compared to all the work with with meditation and contemplation and yoga and all the things at the individual scale, and all the other spiritual things at the smaller scale, we've really had a lot less attention at the micro scale. And so our observation in the Flourishing Enterprise movement is that we're not taking advantage of the feedback and feed forward loops between the scales. So if you imagine just as a very practical example, you go to your spiritual practice on whichever day of the week you do that, or whichever days of the week you do that, and then the next day you walk into your business. The business is just not aligned with that spiritual practice today. And so your ability to operate in a values aligned way in your organization is diminished, which means the organization is not supportive of your spiritual practice and spiritual beliefs. And in fact, recently we've started to see research about how burnout is actually due to moral distress, organizational burnout due to moral distress. So in other words, people's lack of a values alignment with their organization is actually causing them to burn out. It's not necessarily hard work, and I can share some citations on that if people are interested. So our belief is that because we're not taking advantage of these feed forward and feedback loops, because we don't have sufficient focus at the micro organizational scale, the whole pace of systems change is either slowing and certainly not accelerating. And so we believe it's not that we're saying that the macro and the nano don't need attention. Far from it. It definitely needs continued attention. But we're saying the micro is underserved. And if we don't have some people focusing on the micro scale, then the chances of us getting to systems change is pretty low. So the emerging flourishing enterprise movement, of which my community that I helped convene is part, we believe that all organizations need a new goal or purpose, which we would suggest should be sustainable flourishing, and they need a design brief and then practical approaches, so methods and tools to contribute to realizing that goal of sustainable flourishing across the whole system. So we need people focused on getting their organizations to support the systems change, in other words, which I know is well understood in the Global Regeneration Collab. So I guess the question that this comes to mind is how could we proactively design our organizations, both organizations that are aiming to foment system change. So that's a lot of folks in the Global Regeneration Collab. You're seeking to influence, you're seeking to teach, you're seeking to create prototypes for how system change could happen. And you need organizations to do those things. But then we also have all the other organizations that are aiming to meet all other human needs. So need for food, need for sustenance, need for shelter, need for clothing, need for et cetera, et cetera. So how could we design all organizations of both types to accelerate system change towards sustainable flourishing? And the way we used to think about organizations and sustainability was that sustainable development happens in the middle of these three intersecting circles, and business is still seen as a primarily economic thing. And what we used to think is that we want the businesses to do well financially, perhaps do some good, or at least do no harm to society and the environment as they're doing well financially. And in the business model world, and I'll come back to explain why business models in a little bit, we have this definition of a business model that says it describes the rationale for how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. In the original definition, it didn't say financially, but that's all they cared about. So I've taken the liberty of adding that. And the other thing that was going on is that there was this assumption that well-being happens somewhere different from where the wealth is created. So when it's going to escape me, the post-Second World War conference that set up the World Bank, etc., in upstate New York, that they didn't have any systems thinkers at that meeting, which isn't surprising since systems thinking was barely a thing back then. And so they assumed that well-being, which was the objective they set, could happen irrespective of how and where the wealth was created, that they were going to tax to enable the well-being. And so we have these two big assumptions or this big assumption that is obviously now problematic with our better understanding of systems thinking. So what we're suggesting is that we rethink the purpose of all human organizations. Oops, my computer is just taking a pause. Here we go. So first thing is we're systems thinkers, so we understand that sustainable flourishing emerges across all three systems over time. And so now what we think businesses should be focused on is doing only good for society and the environment in order to do well financially. So we flip the logic here completely in terms of what we think the role of business and human organizations in general ought to be. And so now the definition of a business model is a description of how an enterprise defines and achieves success over time. It's both story and numbers. So we're looking for organizations that are socially beneficial, environmentally regenerative, and at the same time, financially viable. So our vision for the future of human organizations is that we imagine a world where they no longer merely attempt to do less harm, which is the current best practice, I think one might say. Rather, they set as their goal the flourishing of human and all other life, which means they're going to create try-impact by being try-profitable. So this is some new language. So this is not triple bottom line, which is a concept that John Elkington has recalled, in fact, back in 2018. So what we're talking about is try profitability, which is socially beneficial, environmentally regenerative, and financially viable. And some of the implications of that shift on the vision and mission of enterprises to enable the possibility for flourishing starts out with, what's the purpose of the organization? So it's to generate social benefit, environmental regeneration, and financial rewards. Where's it going to do that? Everywhere. So it has to take responsibility for its entire value constellation that it's engaged with, all the way up and down its value network. Who's it doing it for? It's doing it for all of its stakeholders now, not just those who are financially invested in the organization, but founders, customers, employees, owners, communities, and of course the investors as well. Why is it doing it? Because we're trying to create the possibility that human and all other life will flourish on this planet for generations to come. And one might refer to these type of businesses as future fit, and we'll come back to future fitness a little later in the conversation. But if they were to operate forever, these organizations would not only do no harm, but would do good to do well. So you might ask yourself, if I'm a business owner, if I'm an organizational leader, why would I choose an enterprise purpose of aiming to flourish? What's in it for me? In other words, in my organization. And with Ondine, we've come up with 8 reasons why enterprises who choose the purpose of sustainable flourishing will themselves, along with all their stakeholders, flourish over time. So first is that this is not a top-down, this is what flourishing is. It's something that you get to define for themselves, although there is plenty of advice about how to do that well. Aiming to flourishing is something we believe is very exciting and generates new possibilities for individuals involved in the enterprise and enterprises themselves. We think it's very practical. It's what the science says is possible. Nature will strive to reach climax ecosystems, flourishing ecosystems, given sufficient available energy. So it's definitely abundance is definitely something that's real. It's the right thing to do from a moral and ethical perspective. It's the best way to gain and retain financial viability as the poly collapse unfolds. It maximizes the possibility for innovation to better face an uncertain future. It provides a new positive language for business. And it enables longer term thinking as well. So we think that these are some good reasons why choosing that as an enterprise purpose is a powerful idea. And so, as mentioned, we're moving from doing well financially and doing less harm or some good towards doing good socially and environmentally to do well financially. So I'm going to stop at that point and take some questions. What are you curious about? Feel free to pick holes. I'm very curious. Brian or Sage, do you want to facilitate or shall I?
And while we're waiting for Sage,
All right,
thank you.
put my mute. Please go right ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Brian.
Yeah, fascinating. So it's, commonly when we're optimizing for profitability or capital or what have you, that's a scale can optimize a single scalar parameter, hit it, that's great. When we've got financial capital, social capital, and environmental capital, you get to choose as an officer in a benefit corporation which of those you're going to prioritize. It'd be nice to have some ability. Could you comment at all on the conversion, if you will, from natural capital to financial capital. Is that the right solution? Or how do officers of a benefit corporation optimize across a three-dimensional vector concurrently?
So our perspective is that it's not a trade-off between those three. That this is something that you need to integrate in order to satisfy the greatest number of needs of the stakeholders. So, which is complex. There's no doubt about that. But that is what nature tends to do. And so I think that's my big picture answer to that question, Brian. The process of business design, which is how can you consciously figure out the answer to that question, specifics to an individual business. This is one of the reasons why we need better tools and better methods for doing this work, because it is significantly more complex than the dramatic oversimplification, which is what we've been doing, for the last 200 years, arguably, where we've essentially ignored the social and environmental in the singular pursuit of wealth. So, people often comment that this sounds very complex, and I'm saying, yep, it is, but that's the way the world actually is. And, denying the way the world actually is isn't actually a very good idea if you want to manage risk, even financially. So the old way of doing things is a dangerous oversimplification, in my view, going forward.
Thank you, Anthony.
You're welcome. Rick, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. We spoke previously about the relationship between regeneration and flourishing, and while that's an interesting area to go down, but I want to focus on the issue of the flourishing aspect of sustainable flourishing organizations, but also zoom out to what the UN is trying to do with their flourishing goals. And I think framing is important. And at a meso level, within your Pan-Archy framework, it's highly appropriate for that particular thing. But one of the things I'd be curious now, because I haven't looked at the UN flourishing goals yet, and I'm wondering to what extent it's actually looking at not from a meso or micro level, but looking at more from a meta level about flourishing futures. Because if we can focus on flourishing futures, that means that we're all working towards co-creating fair, free, flourishing futures for all. So I just wanted a quick reaction, and I'll put something in the chat that I did an AI research on these questions that goes into much more detail than I have time to read or we have time to discuss. But thanks, Anthony.
The book project that Ondine and I are part of, a small part of, one of the things that we've been wrestling with is, and that the editors have been wrestling with, is how do we make this an attractive idea to the policymakers, while at the same time respecting the reality that even the concept of a goal or goals and flourishing isn't necessarily aligned. And certainly using language like global, as in global flourishing goals, is problematic. The idea that there could be one way to flourish for everybody, that's a very modernist idea and not very compatible. So I think the idea in the book is that we're basically critiquing, in a certain sense, the possibility that there can be flourishing goals sort of written once at a global scale and then downloaded onto everybody, assuming that everybody's going to implement them in the same way as part of, quote, the global village. So I think there's a lot of there's going to be a lot of interesting debate and discussion about how do we reconcile those types of things. Because the flip side, of course, is that having some sort of headline to say this is where we as a species are trying to get to over time, or where we're striving to move towards, is a very powerful idea and would, help with all kinds of things at the smaller scales, that we absolutely need. So, how do we reconcile those two things? I think is a very, very much an open conversation right now. And I'm not sure really I responded to your question, but
No, it's very good. No, just a quick response to that, which
mm,
the thing about complexity science is how can you come down to simple rules? And what I heard was perhaps not what you intended, but it seemed a little top down. But the idea of co-creating fair, free, flourishing futures for all
mhm.
implies that it goes across the whole system at all levels. So
Yes, absolutely.
and that there is still self-determination at the grassroots levels to say, what does that mean to me? As you said earlier,
Yeah.
we could have a longer conversation, but I know Gil has something to say.
And just, of course, the bioregional differences between different places in the world mean that
Exactly.
how you go about enabling flourishing,
Yeah.
and we know from the Harvard Human Flourishing Program that the antecedents of flourishing for individuals does vary by culture to some extent, although the major categories are common. Uh,
Yeah.
the relative importance of those categories does vary by culture. Gil.
Hi, thank you, Antony, for the whirlwind survey of the really deep and valuable work you've been doing. And I'm glad you're going to share the slides. There's a bunch of them I want to spend some more time with. I think you gave an answer to your own question about how do we persuade the macro level to move in this direction. Although persuade may not be the right word, it might be more about seduce. And I think the answer is embodied in what you're offering. Flourishing is a powerful and compelling and seductive idea. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find people who oppose the idea in principle. But people oppose it because either they think it's not possible
Mm-hmm.
or because they think there are trade-offs that they're not willing to make. And you reject the trade-offs fundamentally, as do I, as you know. And I think this ties to Brian's question about, how do we operate across a three-dimensional vector? And there are three different design approaches that are possible here. One is sort of the traditional um, uh, uh, um, um, caricature of business. And by the way, I would call that the meso level, not the micro. On your nano, micro, macro scale, we could talk more about that, but I think that would be more useful naming for a number of reasons. One approach is to say, I'm going to maximize returns to my shareholders within the limits of the law. Let's assume that.
Mm-hmm.
And people commonly think that's the purpose of business. That's only been the common conception since Milton Friedman in the early 1970s. Who was a Deming, I think, said the purpose of a business is to do what the business is there to do. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, you have to do that profitably because you have to provide a return on capital. You have to pay your
Mm-hmm.
shareholders the same way you have to pay your utility company and your material suppliers and your labor and so forth. You have to pay for stuff. And shareholders are one of the things you have to pay for. It's not the organizing principle. Nobody goes to work in the morning and says, my goal today is to pay the utility company. Just something you do, but it's not your purpose. So one design principle is to maximize return to shareholders. A second is to maximize return to shareholders while doing the least harm to others. Another, which is maybe the more, the emerging integrative, is to maximize return to shareholders and take care of the other stuff, social environment, employees, community, and so forth. But I think and to minimize or manage the trade-offs between those. And the approach that's more interesting to me, and I think it's hinted at by your try impact, try profitable, is to say the design frame is that we're going to take care of all these things and innovate within that design space and figure out how to do that. It's just not a trade-off approach. It's a different entry into the design question. And of course, in the course of that, you're going to have to make decisions of resource allocation and time sequencing and prioritization and so forth. But I'm going to claim that entering the design frame from that door produces a very different decision space than entering through the door of, I'm going to do the best I can within trade-offs. We know that when that's done, innovation emerges. When the questions asked are different, the solutions that emerge are remarkably different. So it's a matter of frame setting. I think over the past 30 years, we've had some success in seeing that perspective emerge in business and industry.
So I'm gonna challenge that assertion a little bit, Gil, And when later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk about.
Let me just finish the assertion and then go ahead and challenge it.
All right. Okay.
I think we've had some success in that growing in business and industry, less so at the level of what you're calling the macro. And I think it's familiar to us, although not fully evolved at the level of the micro, because anybody who's got, say, a family with 3 children in it knows something about tri-optimization, about, a basic commitment to take care of the whole rather than I'm going to take care of this kid and try not to hurt the other kids too much. It's not what most people do. So innately, biologically, we get this. Translating into the organizational scale, different. And again, so my assertion is that there's some progress at the I don't call the mesoscale. Come back at me, Anthony.
Okay, so I'm gonna come back at you later on in the presentation when I talk about the shift in the way that we do planning, because I would say that the way we need to do planning hasn't shifted significantly at any scale, and in fact has got rather bogged down in the old way of doing things. So I'll come back to you on your comment about the labeling of the scales. Completely agree with you. There is actually a much deeper version of that diagram that I shared, which is in the slides but hidden. So when you get the slides, you will see meso make its full and appropriate appearance in the panarchy model. So thank you for that observation. Colleen and Eckhard, I would like to proceed, if I may, because we do have a limited amount of time and I do have quite a lot of other things to say. However, I am very interested in your questions. So if you're able to stay afterwards, we can come back to them or put them in the chat and I can respond to you offline outside the meeting. So I hope that's okay. Okay, let me share.
Guys, while he's pulling this up, just do me a favor. When you come out and you're ready to go, try to be concise if you can, just so we can get the feedback loops on there and we can keep pushing through that. I think all these conversations are really important. So just be graceful to make sure that we give enough time for other people as we're going through this. Go ahead, Antony.
Okay, thank you very much. So third part of this is tools to design business. So introducing the Flourishing Business Canvas. So I know that the idea of design and designing organizations may not be one that everybody is familiar with. So I thought I'd spend just a couple of minutes talking about why design and why don't we plan, for example, our organizations? Why should we design them? This is the basic observation that Herbert Simon was one of the first to observe back in 1969, that if we want to bring something new into the world, we first have to imagine it, and we have to do that together. And organizations are no exception to that rule. And this is, in fact, now how entrepreneurship is generally taught through the process of design rather than through the process of planning, although business schools are still very slow to teach this idea. It's a much less risky and expensive in time, money, and other resources to iteratively design and test than it is to try and build and operate. And so this is the fundamental idea behind design. You don't throw all your eggs into the basket and say, let's make an omelet. You figure out slowly over time, does anybody want an omelet? And if so, what sort of an omelet do we want? And what sort of eggs are we going to use, et cetera, et cetera. So you design and test. And so we would go a little further than just simple design. We would say systemic design is what we need. Design is not inherently systems thinking. So we need to integrate systems thinking and design thinking. And that, in our view, is an iterative, co-creative learning journey to imagine and test whether or not a new idea will be useful to other people. But the reality is organizations are complicated and complex. So we need to be very clear if we're going to design an organization, what exactly is it that we're imagining? An organization is complicated and complex, so there's many facets. What are we imagining? How do we explore and capture possible designs? Because there could be many alternatives to how we want the organization to work in the future. And then how do we tell stories to other people and get feedback on the usefulness of our imagined organization? So experience and research over the last 20 plus years has strongly suggested that an organization's business model is a very useful thing, in other words, an artifact, something we can design to capture our ideas about a new organization. And it was this fundamental insight that we've built on in our work in the Flourishing Business Community. So the next question would be, so if a business model is a useful thing to design as we design our organizations, why do we need tools? And so same observation, organizations are complex and complicated. Everybody's got a very different idea about what should be considered and usually has different language and words often to describe the same things. There are many different types of knowledge required. Even if your only goal is short-term financial profitability, this is still a fairly complex system. You've got a set of knowledge that you've got to have across quite a number of different disciplines in order to be able to do that. And Gil was highlighting some of those in his remarks a moment ago. But then there's much, much more knowledge is going to be required if the purpose is flourishing, because you've simultaneously got to do these three things. And that's significantly more complicated to satisfy those three requirements than it is to maximize financial profitability. So that means that we've got to systematically apply the knowledge in ways that imagine new possibilities. And so capturing all the required knowledge into a tool to provide a common language to enable that then prompts the organization's co-designers with necessary and sufficient questions can dramatically accelerate the design and testing process, increasing the co-designer's effectiveness, efficiency, reliability, and gracefulness. So this was something that was learned very shortly after the business model canvas, which was the first business model design tool that came into the world back in 2009. But the goal of that tool, as I'll talk about in a moment, was purely financial. So the business model canvas, this is what it looks like. It has 9 questions. So this is the language of the canvas. It asks these 9 questions. That was based on research. What are the necessary and sufficient questions that historically we've believe lead to short-term profitability, and success is financial only. In fact, this assumption was so embedded that there isn't even a space on the canvas to put in any other definition of success. It's just assumed that that's the definition of success. So the social and environmental aspects are completely missing from this model. So what we've done is rethink business models. You've seen this diagram before, but now we're saying it's the business model that is the way of capturing your idea and testing your idea about how are you going to do good to do well. This was first published in a paper that I wrote with Peter Jones back in 2016. It's now been cited over 950 times. We think that tools that would be useful have a certain set of criteria that need to go with them. So if they're going to be useful, they've got to embed all the knowledge necessary to describe and design a business model financially, socially, and environmentally, based on any goal, a combination of enterprise goals and stakeholders, because you may need to describe the business as it currently is, which of course may just be profit seeking, as well as describing a future business, which is maybe seeking to enable the possibility for flourishing. So we need to be able to have a tool that is flexible enough to accommodate any combination of goals and stakeholders from all 3 perspectives. It needs to make that knowledge accessible via a shared language. It's got to be able to describe the present and multiple futures. It needs to enable collaborative meaning and decision making despite the necessary complexity. It needs to be visual and attractive to get people to use it. And just as an observation, this is a pretty challenging design brief. This is not something that's going to happen very easily or very straightforwardly. So we need to be ready to critique tools that are proposed in this space because we're trying to meet all of these different requirements. So the proposal that we've come up with in the Flourishing Enterprise Movement is that a tool that could be useful is the Flourishing Business Canvas as a holistic and integrated enterprise design tool. It is a tool that provides a common language in a useful visual framework to enable you to collaboratively sketch. And somebody is off mute. Somebody I just heard background noise there. So it's a tool that enables a common language in a useful visual framework to enable you to collaboratively sketch, prototype, design, improve, understand, measure, diagnose, and most importantly, tell stories about any business model, socially, environmentally, and economically, present or future, words and numbers. It's based on 3 years of very well-cited peer-reviewed research, as I mentioned, and 10 years of practice with entrepreneurs and business leaders around the world. It systemically extends Alex Osterwalder's research and practice, so he is the giant on whose shoulders I and others in the movement are standing on, and that's the earlier business model canvas. So the holistic idea is that we believe you should design your business model considering all sources of opportunity and material risk relevant to all of your stakeholders. And by doing that, you increase the possibility to achieve all the stakeholders' goals effectively, efficiently, reliably, and gracefully. So here it is, the Flourishing Business Canvas, a language for future fit enterprise design, 17 necessary and sufficient questions to describe any business model. And this is a tool that is available for free use, commercially and non-commercially, and downloadable from our website. It's now in 10 languages as well. So just to walk through the diagram, to walk through the tool, first of all, it puts the business into its full context, as would be understood by a natural scientist. So the environment containing society, containing the economy. It breaks the 17 questions down into 4 perspectives, which is important because 17 is a large number, and breaking them into 4 perspectives helps people deal with that complexity. So we have the responding to the question words, each perspective. The outcomes perspective responds to why the business exists and how it's going to determine whether it's meeting that purpose. People perspective is who's involved. The value perspective is what the business does. And the process perspective is how and where does the business operate. And where is important. Silicon Valley would like you to believe everything's going to be virtual, but last time I checked, I slept in a bed in a place and I ate food grown in a field. So place matters. The next thing that the canvas does is it separates out the things that are unique to the particular business that we're trying to design from things that are common to everyone and things that are shared with everyone. So it's, again, contextualizes the business in a way that earlier tools do not. Here are the 17 questions. These are the questions that the earlier business model canvas asks, if you're familiar with that. What this means is that you can take a business design that's purely profit-seeking, put it onto the Flourishing Business Canvas without making any changes to the answers to the questions, and you can explore what new things you see. And in fact, we run workshops where we do exactly that. And it's very educational for the participants to see what new things they see, just because we've got different expanded and additional questions. If you'd like a case study, we don't have time for that today, but we have a fully worked case study on our YouTube channel, which is at Flourishing Biz. And I invite you to take a look at that, and you'll see how the canvas works in practice. Key benefits, just a quick summary. So it's a common language for describing and designing flourishing enterprises, fit for the very different futures we know are coming. It's for any combination of stakeholders and their goals. It builds an understanding of interconnections, the enterprise with society, the environment, and the economy, for any and all organizations whose aim is to foment systems change, like many of you in the Global Regenerative Collab are doing. But it's also for any and all organizations whose aim is to meet people's authentic needs that need to be met in order for them to flourish. It enables broader, deeper, and richer conversations about all aspects of value co-creation and disruption. It provides context to enable stakeholder collaboration around their shared goals, informed by their values, enabling alignment on key strategic directions when starting an enterprise or transforming an existing enterprise. And getting leaders aligned on these types of things is usually very hard work. It's still hard work, but the tool helps because it provides the common language. And it also supports earlier practice, as I mentioned, including all the concepts from the Profit First business model canvas, as well as the lean startup and customer development processes that are now commonly used in accelerators and incubators around the world. And as I said, available for use in all use cases without charge under a Creative Commons license. So what's going on with the canvas right now? We have 8 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters with more on the way. Canvas is now available in 10 languages with more on the way. All that translation was done by our Flourishing Business Community around the world. We've got activity in 75 countries now. It was tested over 10 years by 320 individuals and organizations. We have 775 people in our online Mighty Network community. It's been downloaded 11,500 times in the past 24 months, and it's been used by tens of thousands of people around the world now. couple of examples, Innovation Norway, the National Innovation Agency of Norway, is standardizing on the Flourishing Business Canvas for business modeling with startups and established businesses. An innovation cluster in southern Norway is using it for strategy development. The Pan-European Climate Change Initiative is using it as just one example, as a accelerator in Montreal, Canada, that is using it. And as, again, one example, we've got a travel and tourism boutique consultancy in Ottawa, Canada, who's also been using it. So I'll stop again there for a couple of moments and take a few more questions about the Flourishing Business Canvas as a tool to help you efficiently, effectively, reliably, and gracefully design organizations that enable the possibility for flourishing.
So you got a question right off the bat. I'll go ahead and cue it up for you. So Rick Bethella asked recently, so how might the Flourishing Business Canvas be adapted to the public and political sectors?
So my co-author, Peter Jones, actually has developed a canvas called the Flourishing Communities Canvas or Flourishing Cities Canvas. That hasn't had so much exposure or work done with it, but it does exist. If you put that question in the chat, I'll dig out the reference for it to share. Yeah, the idea that you might want to have a design tool for larger scale change, so at the meso and macro scale, I think is a very interesting one. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Colleen.
Yes, actually, this last section answered my questions quite well. We have been using, well, first of all, let me just explain. We're looking at a new way of regenerating rural communities. And so we have set up a model that has the business model canvas filled out as you explained. Now, what the feedback that we're getting from people is, how do we talk about it? How do we tell the story? Because people are kind of stuck in the individual mode of, I need to own my home. I need to have some sort of a sense of security that home ownership gives me, so on. Now, our community structure does not include home ownership. It includes a cooperative ownership of the means of production instead. And so the problem that I'm having is like, okay, you don't own your home, but you own the business that owns all the homes. and they're like, but how does that work? And so trying to figure out how to talk about how that works. And they're saying, okay, so I don't have to spend money on a mortgage anymore. I don't have to buy insurance. I don't have to do all of that. But what do I do with the money? You know, where do I put the money if it's not going into my home that can give me the same kind of security that home ownership otherwise would give me? And I'm like, well, you can invest it in other businesses, or you can do all kinds of things with it. You can put it in the bank or whatever. But I don't. I'm just wondering if you have some suggestions on how we might better talk about the thing.
So one of the things Ondine and I did in the very first set of workshops that we ran back in 2017 was we asked people to consider the dictionary definition of success, which is all about wealth and fame, believe it or not. That's what the dictionary says. A successful person is somebody who's wealthy and famous. And we invited people to ask themselves, does that align with your values? Is that align with what you want? And so I suggest that part of the challenge that the folks you're dealing with, Colleen, have is that they have bought into, maybe implicitly, the sort of hegemonic definition of success, and what we're offering with Flourishing is a alternative definition of success, which is supported by what the positive psychologists say you need to do for yourself and for the people around you, because it's an integrated thing. You know, flourishing doesn't happen by yourself; it happens in community. You know, invite them to consider what the Harvard Human Flourishing Program has to say about how do people actually flourish, and then take action aligned with that.
Yeah, the one thing that I have found is helpful is I explain it as a corporation that is nestled into a university campus. That way you can see it as both a nonprofit and a for-profit organization that are kind of nestled together. And so that's been somewhat helpful. Well, okay, so I'm working for this organization. And it's providing a home for me. Now, how do I? And I'm just saying, okay, because education is a very important thing to our process. Education is where you find your future endeavor, is because when you are no longer a provider of labor, then you become a provider of education.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the whole, your future is to be able to teach what you now are learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And so passing on knowledge, passing on wisdom, is a very under-recognized contribution that you can make to the flourishing of your community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. So to keep going, since we have about 20 minutes left, I wanted to tackle, why do we talk about a flourishing enterprise innovation toolkit and not just the canvas? If the canvas is so useful, why do we need a toolkit? And so tools, just like the canvas, are great. You know, hammers, screwdrivers, saws are all great things to have. But tools are not very useful if you don't also have related and complementary tools, a nail set, a countersink drill. If you don't have methods for their effective use and knowledge of how to use them, you know, how do I build a chair? If you don't have design principles, you know, knowledge of what does the ideal result look like? What's a good chair look like? What's a good house look like? Patterns, generalized examples of ideal results to inspire and to speed up your design process, and then case studies of specific examples of the best results that are possible today. We also want to observe that tools are tangible and social technologies. And so the conclusion that we reached in the Flourishing Business Community is that if we want to enable leaders to co-design their enterprise's business model, we actually need a comprehensive toolkit of tools and methods for innovating towards sustainable flourishing. And that is the inspiration behind the Flourishing Enterprise Innovation Toolkit. So it's a toolkit for all organizational leaders and innovators. So it doesn't matter if it's for-profit, not-for-profit, etc. It starts off with design principles and our best ethical and moral frameworks informed by science, as well as deep indigenous wisdom. We're trying to build a toolkit. So the first thing that we need to put it in is a tool, which is the first tool in the toolkit is the Flourishing Business Canvas. It won't be the only tool, but it is currently the first tool. Then we need design principles for flourishing enterprise. And right now we're using something called the Future Fit Business Benchmark, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The next thing is we need methods, the dance steps, to effectively use the tools, to apply the methods, to apply the principles. We then need patterns and case studies for inspiration and for examples. We think that if we had such a toolkit, that would enable leaders to close their innovation gaps to sustainable flourishing. So currently, the toolkit is being co-created by, with, and for the community. So this is not a closed co-creation process for the toolkit. Currently, it has one tool and two methods. The canvas is the first tool. And then we have a method for the use of the canvas to design new strategies with existing businesses, and a second method for the design of new enterprises that are going to aim to realize sustainable flourishing over time. We have lots of future plans. I saw your question about AI. So the app is certainly considering how we might use large language models. I don't really subscribe to the idea that they're artificially intelligent in ways to help people accelerate their learning journey towards designing better businesses. But we have lots of other ideas, and things are bubbling up from the community all the time about other things that we might want to add to the toolkit over time. So if we're going to talk about methods, we ought to talk about what's going on when you use a tool like the Flourishing Business Canvas. And the Flourishing Business Canvas is creating a business model. So the process we're using is modeling, and modeling is the process of creating useful models. So it's how you create your model and learn whether or not it is useful. And we need to be clear that models themselves just capture your current shared understanding of your current situation or of the future you wish to co-create. And it's worth observing, of course, that models are wrong always, but some models can be useful because models are not reality. They're some subset of reality. And the other thing to note is, and apologies to former US President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the model is nothing, the modeling is everything. So it's the process of the learning that you do by using a model that's really helpful. So the overall learning process is we have the world, we have the stakeholders of the organization and who undertake uncovery and validation testing research in and with the world. They capture their understanding in a model. And if it's to do with an organization, we would suggest that the Flourishing Business Canvas is a good tool to capture their shared understanding about the way the world is and the way they'd like the world to be in their organization within it. And then they use the business model to collectively identify hypotheses and assumptions that they then go back out into the world and test and validate. And that is the learning process that we suggest needs to go on. And as you can see, the model is simply a way of capturing the current understanding. So we think by following this sort of learning process, you can accelerate and deepen your ability to be innovative, closing your innovation gaps faster and more comprehensively. So how did we used to do this? We used to do something called forecasting in terms of developing plans and strategies for organizations. So forecasting, basically, in a profit-first context, we're trying to solve two things. The first is to realize near-term goals, which is to be as profitable as possible. And the second is to survive today. So we need to do those two things at the same time. So if we do something that means we're going to go out of business today, we can't realize our goal to be profitable in the near term. So we need to do those two things at the same time. And your next business model, the one that describes where you'd like to be in 12 to 36 months, integrates how you intend to do both of these things. And the way we used to forecast, or the way we forecast, is we use the past to create projections of likely near-term futures, and the long-term outcomes just kind of happen. And of course, that's not very useful if we want to intentionally enable the possibility for flourishing or future fitness. So how does it work? We start in the past, we review the past, we research the present, and use this to create predictions of futures that logically appear likely and possible based on this analysis that satisfies those two criteria to survive in the present and meet our near-term goals. So we do business planning, we develop and commit to realizing a strategy and a next business model based on the analysis. And over time, wherever we end up is wherever we end up, because we never imagined where we wanted to end up. We just go somewhere, right? So, as I said, if we want to actually get somewhere, like the possibility for flourishing, this isn't a very useful process for learning. So when we change the process, the first thing we have to think about is how are we going to set the goals to intentionally create an outcome? Because today, that's not what we do. We don't set long-term goals in our organizations. And so just a quick review here, and credit to Bob Willard for this diagram. This is your current state of your business, your enterprise as it is today. We've got the unsustainable past on the left and the flourishing future on the right. And how do you, what do you do in forecasting? Well, you go and look at your state in some baseline year, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, and you say, I'll be 10% better. I'll be 5% better. I'll reduce my water use. I'll increase my profits. I'll reduce my costs, etc. Sometimes you'll compare yourself to competitors, and you'll explore your competitors' goals and use that to define short-term goals. Sometimes, if you're in certain industries, you'll define goals that actually make things worse and slow change. I won't go into any more of that in any detail. Or we could set goals by imagining the flourishing future and the idea to be future fit or to sustain the possibility for flourishing. And we can compare our current state with that future and then say, how are we going to get there? And this is the shift in the way we're suggesting you do planning. So one of the things that sometimes we get critiqued about this diagram is people are saying you've got to constrain your future goals based on the science, based on deep indigenous wisdom, based on ethics and morals. Isn't that going to limit creativity? And, isn't business all about being innovative and creative? And our observation is that actually constraints actually have a very strong possibility to enable learning and innovation. So we can imagine any future we like. It could be a possible future, an impossible future, a desirable one, an undesirable one. And it's the values we hold and the design principles we choose that will determine whether or not we'll imagine futures and choose purposes that are feasible. So those are things that are possible, likely, and desirable. And what we've learned, and this is coming from the arts world, that learners and innovators enable their unlimited creativity to imagine improved futures by constraining those futures by design principles they choose based on their values. So a artist faced with without any constraints finds it very, very hard to create. So it's the block of marble. It's the size of the canvas. It's the type of material the canvas is made out of. It's the size of the piece of clay. It's the type of pencil you choose to use or the paint you choose to use. Those are constraints on creativity. And yet, without those constraints, the artist can't create something. And we believe that applies to business as well. So if we don't constrain our future stories by principles informed by our scientific knowledge, our deep indigenous wisdoms, and our values, then it's likely our future business model designs will not be possible, likely, nor desirable, and be full of unintended consequences for ourselves and others. And of course, we don't constrain our current business designs by these things today. And guess what? We have lots of things that are not possible nor desirable, and we have lots of things with many, many unintended consequences that are coming out because we don't do this today. So if we're going to go down this change in how we set goals and how we're going to design, and that we're going to design, what are the requirements for this new approach? I think you picked up this trend that I'm big on, saying, what do we want before I reveal what our current thinking as to how we meet those requirements? So now we have a three-way challenge that we've got to deal with. So now we've got long-term purposes that we care about proactively, that we really want to focus on those things. But the reality is, and again, Gil highlighted this, if you only focus achieving those long-term purposes, the likelihood is that you'll never survive to create it. You're going to go out of business in the short term. If you tried to put a flourishing business out there in today's market, law, regulatory conditions, customer preference, you'd go out of business very quickly and you'd never exist to see a flourishing future. Your organization would never exist. So clearly, you've also got this tension that you need to survive today. You've got to be sufficiently viable in today's environment. But if you only do that, you're never going to contribute to realizing your long-term purpose. So that's the tension. And the third thing is you've got to do no harm on the journey. So you've got to ensure how you realize the purpose and survive today does not make our global challenges even worse. And our observation is that your business models integrate how you intend to do all three of these things at the same time. So the requirements for a new strategy and planning approach is that we need to start with the end in mind and proactively explore what a feasible long-term future looks like to start with. Then and this is very different from historical planning approaches where we only look backwards. Now we have a science and indigenous wisdom tradition informed descriptions of what is feasible and hence creative constraints on long-term enterprise purpose and associated goals. But once we've done that step, then we have to come back to the present and explore how the enterprise can proactively move towards those goals in the near term, while at the same time remaining viable and doing no harm. So this is the new approach these are the criteria we need for a new approach to strategy and planning. So introducing a planning technique called backcasting, but this isn't backcasting that you may have experienced in scenario planning, which is where backcasting came from. Interestingly, it came from the oil and gas industry originally. This is backcasting against science-based design principles. And this is from work that was done in the early 1990s originally by Karl-Henrik Robert and others who formed the Natural Step NGO. And so how backcasting against science-based principles work and is now we've got the present, the near future, and the far future. We've got a process we call ABCD, and it's an iterative process. So this is not something you do just once, you do it many times over time. You start by creating an inspiring vision of what you want, which hopefully is sustainable flourishing. So you appreciate and define success, and you constrain that by the enterprise's purpose, which hopefully is sustainable flourishing, by science-based future fit design principles, humanity's deep indigenous wisdoms, and our best moral and ethical frameworks. And the blue circles there are the logo for future fit. Then what do you do? So then you come back to the present and understand how things are today. How does the current state compare to that vision? The next step is you create solutions. How are you going to get from the present to the future? You know, what things are we missing? What technologies don't we have? What changes to society do we need? What new laws and regulations do we need? And you start to think about what the pathway is. And each of those hops is an iteration around the ABCD process. And the change between, you know, you've got a number of different orange possibilities here. How do we choose between those orange possibilities in the first hop? Well, we use these prioritizing questions. Does it align with our values? Does the solution we are choosing move us in the right direction? Is it flexible? Because the future is inherently unknowable. So we want flexibility. And is it a good return on the investment? Because we need to generate returns even in the near term so we can keep going to realize our vision over time. And so each hop is a loop around the ABCD process using backcasting. So mentioned future fit a few times just to unpack this a little bit further. Since 1991 approximately, we've had a working set of 8 design principles to realize a flourishing society at the macro scale. So these are some of the papers that have been written about this. These principles are as follows. For those of you not familiar with them, this is the framework for strategic sustainable development, which some of you may know. So in a flourishing society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing concentrations of substances extracted from the Earth's crust, i.e. carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's from burning fossil fuels, concentrations of substances produced by society, i.e. plastics, and degradation by physical means. So nature isn't subject to chopping down all the forests. And then in that society, and this is more recent work, people are not subject to conditions that systematically undermine their capacity to meet their need for well-being, influence, learning and growth, equity and meaning. And these are all antecedents of trust, which you may remember I mentioned is a prerequisite for a flourishing society. So this is great, but this is at the macro scale. How does this apply to organizations? That's what the Future Fit Foundation did. Dr. Bob Willard posed the question back in 2014, if I remember correctly, 2013 even, and then work was done with others, Jeff Kendall, for example, and this is now run by a foundation out of London, UK. It's also under Creative Commons license. So what Future Fit does is it takes those 8 macro goals and says, how do we apply them to organizations at the micro scale? So they're in 2 parts. There's break-even goals. So this is equivalent of I'm losing money, I'm not making money, I'm breaking even. So these things are all black and white. So you either do these or you don't. You're either breaking even or you're not breaking even. So break-even goal says, for example, energy is from renewable resources. Either all energy you use is from renewable energy or you're not future fit. So I'll just pick one of the other ones. Number 13, employees are paid at least a living wage. Either you do that or you don't. If you don't do it, you're not future fit. You're not breaking even from a social and environmental perspective. If you do that, you are. at least breaking even. But then, of course, breaking even isn't sufficient. We want regeneration. So then there are the positive pursuit goals, and these talk to how you work with others in order to bring about system change once you've broken even as an individual organization. And so what we do in our work is we'll use these goals to test our proposed business model designs to see if the future business that we are imagining will in fact break even and enable the possibility for flourishing over time. So the methods that we've developed based on backcasting, the generic recommendation is that you apply backcasting, the ABCD method, constrained by science-based future fit design principles. The first method I mentioned is the Flourishing Enterprise Strategy Design Method. This is published in this book and is available for download in various places if you know where to look, and I can share that if people are interested. And we now have a range of approaches to implementing this method in practice by various community leaders around the world. And in consulting practices, for example, how do I help organizations that exist move towards flourishing? Then secondarily, with Ondine, we developed the Flourishing Startup Method. This is based on her original research that she did during her master's project in 2014, 2015. And that was published, the first publication of that was in 2025, when we reported on the research that we did to test the method. Just recently, we have submitted our final version of a book chapter which describes the method end to end, and that's coming out in a book that we publish later on this year, edited by folks from the Harvard Human Flourishing Project, called Transforming Business and Education for Flourishing. If people are interested, we can share the manuscript for that if you promise not to share it further. And we also have a full Flourishing Entrepreneurship Accelerator, which is an academically micro-certified education program by community leader Flourishing Startups. Full disclosure, that's a co-creation of myself, of Ondine and myself. Just to say that there may just be some conflict of interest in me mentioning that. How are these methods being used around the world? The Flourishing Enterprise Strategy Design Method, we've used it in Norway, in Europe, in Canada, and I think Jan is still on the call. So Jan and I are busy looking at early stage use of this method for flooring and personal protective equipment in the circular economy consortia and elsewhere in other circular economy contexts. And we're looking for further opportunities. So perhaps some folks in this community know about that, and there's lots of things that we can do to accelerate that testing and refinement. Then we have the Flourishing Startup Method. This has now been embedded in programming for 25 startup programmers for a number of incubators and accelerators in Canada. We've got the micro-certified Train the Trainer, the course that I mentioned. We've certified 40 coaches to date. We're actually at time, I recognize, but some of the curiosities, perhaps for a further conversation, if I can be so bold, could be, could the Canvas and the associated methods be used to accelerate the work of the Global Regeneration Collabs community? Could Collab community members' work be accelerated if their organizations' business models were proactively designed and tested using these methods and tools? And how could explicit alignment between Collab members' organizational purposes, so regeneration and flourishing, and their business models accelerate the achievement of their system change goals? And could organizations that Collab community members are working with, encourage where Collab members are encouraging them to adopt regenerative practice, could their adoption of those practices be accelerated if those organizations' business models were proactively designed and tested? And then are there opportunities to undertake research on how the application of these tools and methods, plus the future fit design principles, can enable faster adoption of regenerative flourishing practices and hence the realization of system change outcomes? I'm just going to keep going, if you don't mind, Sage, and we'll come back to questions if folks.
Let me interrupt real quick before you get into invitations. Sorry, guys.
Yes.
So we're getting ready to wrap here at the end of the hour. I want to hold everyone's time accountable on this. Just you're welcome to stay. Antony is already prepared to stay and continue to go through this. Eckhart, I know you asked to slow down. We're going to do a really good job of making sure we get the recording on this, just in case you need to review it later, just so you have that. And for anyone else who needs to review this later, we'll make sure I've had a very horrible job of making sure I get the recordings over to Dave Winslow so he can post those, but I will make a conscious effort to make sure I get this version up there for you guys. That said, next week we're going to be interviewing Cheyenne, who is here briefly with MitoLabs.ai. It's another version of like a high-low or a HIFA and sort of group collaboration on how you bring coordination together into a system. Cheyenne's new to this world and building his Mito Labs. So he's probably going to come on tomorrow. I'm going to interview, or not tomorrow, next Wednesday. I'm going to interview and talk a little bit. And then honestly, your guys' feedback for what you need in collaboration systems, what you're looking for, where the gaps are, those are going to be really important because I'm going to have a designer and a dev in here that is totally willing to say, okay, what should this script look like? What do you need in collaboration tools? So for those that it's important to, please show up next Wednesday. That said, I'm going to shut up now. Antony, floor is back to you. Go ahead and continue on, sir.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for not doing a better job of time management. So invitations to close, and then we can come back to questions. We now have, thanks to work that Ondine led, a Flourishing Business Model Design training course. So this is how you could work, and it's an interactive course, so it's an opportunity for you to work on the business model for your organization or for your clients' organizations. It gives you an opportunity to learn how to use the Flourishing Business Canvas. It gives you an opportunity to meet people from around the world aiming to enable flourishing business, and our current cohort has probably 20 plus countries represented in it. It's an online course with live weekly office hours where you have the opportunity to work with your colleagues, and we encourage collaboration between participants even outside of that circumstance. We have 90 videos of us working with a real entrepreneurial team using the Canvas to give you a sense of how this works in practice, and then lots of practical hands-on activities. It's as accessible as we can make it financially, so sponsorships, playing it forward, giving and receiving. So we're interested in folks who might be interested in supporting people taking this course, as well as people who need the support. The next cohort starts September the 18th. You can sign up already. We have 30 people in our first cohort with the collab, 45 in the second cohort. Although, as Ondine likes to remind me, this cohort in September will be, I believe, the 7th time we've run this course, as it has evolved over time. We're also open to private cohorts and other delivery possibilities, so please reach out to explore those with us. Second, please join our community, the Flourishing Business Community. At this link here, gives you a chance to be part of a planetary-wide peer community of change makers focused on the micro scale of system change, opportunity to meet new people and get results with your organization, as well as accessing exclusive content. It's free to join, and you can get quite a lot of value just out of being in the lobby. Full membership access to a lot of additional material and things is $100 a year or €100 a year. Again, we are open to financially supporting people who can't afford that. We invite you to read the book chapter on the Flourishing Enterprise Strategy Design Method. And if you would like to explore next steps on its application in your context, then very happy to do that. Please reach out to me. For the Flourishing Startup Method, Ondine runs a monthly 90-minute introduction to the method, and those are coming. There's more of those coming up. And Ondine, if you're still here, maybe you'd like to put that link in the chat. You can read more about the method, either the testing of it in the 2025 article or the new chapter. And again, you could ask Ondine for that chapter manuscript. And perhaps you'd like to consider how this might help your startup or entrepreneurial clients or clients who are advised startups to make material progress towards improving their future fitness. Finally, our next community events, we meet every month where members of the community talk about their experiences using the Canvas and the methods in their contexts around the world. So we have two actually this month for the first time. We've never done two in 1 month before. So it's normally the second Tuesday of each month at 1500 UTC. So we have Ebony Chris, who's going to be talking about the application of the Canvas in her coaching of entrepreneurs. And her observation around how non-linear minds try to build linear businesses and the tensions that arise, and how the Canvas can help people work through those tensions. And then secondarily, and one of the things that I'm most excited about right now is that we've got school kids using the Canvas. So we've got a group of school kids from Montreal, Canada, who have been using the Canvas the last 2 years. And they're going to come and talk about their experiences in how they've been designing organizations that support the realization of the SDGs. And that's on April the 28th. The registration for both of those is open at the links there, and I will try and put those in the chat in just a moment. All the past events are in our blog, and full members of the community get access to all the slides and the video of all those past events. So very quickly summary, the Flourishing Enterprise Innovation Toolkit is a toolkit for innovators striving to do good, to do well, who want to intentionally create enterprises that are socially beneficial, environmentally regenerative, and financially viable. And it has methods to apply science-based principles provided by the Future Fit Business Benchmark to ensure our future business models are possible, likely, and desirable. And if you'd like to join us, please do so at our community. And I'll just say that this has been a presentation of the not-for-profit that is building that community to bring the Canvas and the associated methods and other elements of the toolkit to the world. And I will stop and go back and take questions now. Thank you for letting me go over time a little bit.